Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, August 17th, 2023, and today we're going to be talking about an updated 2024 Senate election prediction. This is my first video on this topic in quite a few months when it comes down to actually predicting every single state that is upcoming in just around a year and a quarter. I mean, we're getting very close to the 2024 election cycle, and we are nearly 1 year away from the upcoming presidential, Senate, and everything else that coincides with that election. And with that, we are starting to build back up to this 1 month, every single month video where we talk about an update to the Senate races. Now, the unfortunate reality is, with not many candidates entered into the race in major states such as Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Montana, we are at a point where we don't really have much more than speculation. Things that are being said by potential candidates or being conveyed through messaging through the top tier, Republican Party. Those are the things we are working off of when it comes down to this map. So for the next few months, we probably will see very minimal changes when it comes down to the Senate map. But it's always interesting to take a look because they do tell us some very interesting results very early on. And it's always nice to compare to see where we thought the Senate race was going to be and then compare it to the actual results a year and a half later. We're going to start off by characterizing the states that we know are not going to flip to either side of the aisle. These are states like Mississippi and Wyoming that are very solid and strong for the Republican Party. That also means we'll be characterizing states that are very solid and strong for the Democratic Party, states such as New York and Massachusetts. And the thing about this Senate map is that it is very lopsided in favor of the Republican Party. It's a very good place to be if you're on the GOP side because of how many seats Democrats are going to be defending that are just ultimately swing states. States like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, states that were competitive in 2022 and 2020 and 2018 and 2016 that Democrats will have to defend again in 2024. But what I will say is that there are a lot of factors at play besides it just being a swing state, ones that might move the state away from being its swing state traditional competitive status as it did in the last election, but it will be always interesting, of course, to watch the race change over time. So we're starting off with Democrats being at roughly 43 to the Republican parties. I believe they should be at a higher position here when it comes down. I guess we would normally characterize Florida in that regard, but we're doing this based off margin, right? So we're not going to say that Florida is lost for the Democratic Party in terms of margin, but in terms of chances, it absolutely is. I mean, Democrats are not going to be winning Florida in the upcoming Senate elections. And if I'm wrong, well, very good news for Democrats because they're probably winning by a landslide when it comes down to the national map. So here we are, 47 to 43, 10 toss-up seats. Currently speaking, Republicans only hold 2 out of these 10 toss-up seats. Democrats hold 8. So a lot of defense for the Democratic Party, a lot of defending territory. No gains expected from this Senate map as of right now, which isn't the best news for the Democratic Party, but it could be a lot worse. If we were to apply the 2016 election results to our map here, I mean, I can just quickly show you so you can see what that means. States like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania would be red. States like Arizona and Georgia would be red. Florida would be red. Texas would be red, right? You look at the map and you see, okay, wait, if the map was like 2016, Democrats would actually be in for a much worse position. Republicans would hold, I believe, Democrats would only win out of this map Nevada, and Democrats would win, Republicans would win the rest. It would be a 56 to 44 Senate map, and it's just a very fascinating point for the Democratic Party to be. But the reality is that's not how this map is going to go. Democrats have likely states they're going to win. Republicans have likely states they're going to win. For instance, Florida, although not a safe red state, is probably going to go to the GOP, specifically Senator Rick Scott, by 12 to 13 points in the upcoming election. Potentially could be more, but I do think the presidential margin will narrow it down. I think Ron DeSantis and Marco Rubio have always done better than the national Republican Party, have always outperformed what expectations were. Rubio in 2016 won by 8 on the same ballot that Trump won by 1. In 2018, Ron DeSantis won the governor's race, even though all the polls and all the indicators nationwide too were saying that Democrats were going to win the Florida governor's race. Democrats lost their best opportunity at winning the state of Florida in 2018 by a very narrow margin, but that's because Ron DeSantis did very, very well. He was able to win over voters, then 4 years later went on to win by 20 points. So while I do think it's a state that Democrats shouldn't contest to the way that they should have in the past, it's still going to be still a Republican, and with that, and along those lines, will be a Republican state. So enough talking about Florida. Let's move down to the 9 toss-up states. So these actually range in a variety of different ways. It's very interesting to see West Virginia along the same map as Arizona, characterized by the same toss-up status, but I don't think they'll be going the same way. I think we can start off by characterizing West Virginia as a likely red state, and I know it might be an unpopular position to take a Democratic incumbent like Joe Manchin, who has had a strong electoral history in the past, but the definition of strong has definitely varied over time. Yes, it is a Trump plus 40 state, and any Democratic victory is impressive, but it becomes less impressive when you look at the actual circumstances surrounding his most recent election result in 2018. In 2018, he was running against Patrick Morrisey, a candidate who barely campaigned and didn't really have much of a strong backing from the mainstream GOP. Yes, Donald Trump did campaign against Joe Manchin, but keep in mind Joe Manchin had been working from a margin in 2012 that was a victory of 24 points, a margin from 2010 that he won by 10 points. He went from 10 points to 24 points, then dropped all the way down in 2018. Keep in mind the national environment was Democrat plus 8 to a 3-point margin. If the national environment shifts the way it did in 2022, West Virginia is gone for Democrats. Even in 2020, and you can see why the presidential effect matters, when Donald Trump was winning by 40, Shelley Moore Capito was winning by 43. Every single down ballot Republican outperformed Donald Trump in 2020, at least almost every single one, and it was apparent even in the state of West Virginia. Very well could happen this time around, and I think, although Joe Manchin is, presumably well liked, he's going to be in for a loss in this state, the same way Heidi Heitkamp was, Joe Donnelly was, Claire McCaskill was. Some of these states, polarization takes way too strong of a hold. So West Virginia goes to the GOP. Where are we seeing Democratic states where they have a likely margin? Well, I believe they will win Pennsylvania by a likely margin. For one instance, Bob Casey is quite popular, and I really don't think that you're going to find David McCormick to be that guy. He's not some type of super strong, electoral juggernaut. Bob Casey is a tried and tested candidate. He'll be running alongside the Democratic Party with Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and Joe Biden won the state in 2020. I think we're in for a good result for Democrats in Pennsylvania, and I especially think if David McCormick becomes viewed in a similar vein that Dr. Oz was, as is very popular, as is very possible, given that both of which were not necessarily residents of the state, David McCormick being from Connecticut, Dr. Oz being from New Jersey. It'll be very interesting. So I think Pennsylvania is a likely blue state at this point in time, and I'm very comfortable characterizing it as such in terms of margin. Minnesota and Virginia, I went back and forth on thinking about as likely states in my last prediction, now being safe states. I think these two will have very strong margins for the Democratic Party. Looking at where we are, expecting for this rematch, expecting the indictments to crack down on Donald Trump, Virginia will be double digits for Biden easily. The question is it plus 15? Tim Kaine almost always outperforms national Democrats. Amy Klobuchar almost always outperforms national Democrats, whether that's a midterm, whether that's a presidential. You can see in the election results, and you will see it again in 2024. So much more confident about them being safe blue states. I also think Agus King, now that he's running for re-election, going to be very solid margin there too. He's well liked. He's an independent who caucuses with the Democratic Party, wins over voters in a similar way that Susan Collins does. I think, Maine is a blue state. You move over to the Rust Belt. This also might be an unpopular opinion, but I think given that no Republicans have yet to challenge Tammy Duckworth in the state, not Tammy Duckworth, what am I talking about? Tammy Baldwin. Tammy Duckworth is right below. Tammy Baldwin in the state of Wisconsin, on top of the fact, too, that they can't seem to run anyone. It isn't just that nobody's announced yet. It's the bench has cracked. You're talking about somebody completely kicking out one of the legs of the bench. Everybody falls off, right? Nobody wants to run. Nobody wants to do it because they know the electoral history is in their favor. Take a look at 2018. Tammy Baldwin wins by 11, right? Take a look at 2012. Keep in mind, Paul Ryan, the VP candidate for Mitt Romney, is from Wisconsin. Romney campaign invests a lot in Wisconsin. Wisconsin. Tammy Baldwin wins by 6 points. So against a very popular former governor, someone who was well recognized, well liked, couldn't beat her, right? So you go ahead and take a look at that, and no Republican wants to be the losing candidate when some of these districts might actually be redistricted to be more competitive. Republicans are going to be worrying about winning swing districts now that the Wisconsin Supreme Court is expected to change the maps ahead of 2024. On top of that, the 2024 Senate race and the fact that Joe Biden won in the last election and Democrats won the governorship in the last election in 2022, defying all odds. They don't want to be the losers, right? That's one thing that politicians never want to do. They want to leave on their own accord. They want to retire. They don't want to be pushed out. The state of Michigan, I also think is a likely blue state at this point. Lisa Slotkin potentially faced off against James Craig, whoever it might be, Hill Harper, etc. I don't know. But where we are today, this is a good position for the Democratic Party. They are in a strong one when it comes down to candidacy, when it comes down to the bench, when it comes down to who they have. There is a significant portion of Republicans who have also, similar to Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, have pulled themselves out of the race or decided against running because they simply believe they're going to lose. Michigan's 11-point victory for Gretchen Whitmer should have been a warning sign for Republicans. Joe Biden's 3-point victory should have been a warning sign for Republicans. The 2018 victory should have been a warning sign for Republicans, and the House election results recently were very beneficial for Democrats in Michigan, so it makes sense they would be worried about a swing seat Democrat who won and continues to win in a Republican district in Michigan can win statewide, because she absolutely can. So 5 remaining races that we're going to be taking a look at. Let's go ahead and switch over to see some of the states Republicans are expected to win. For instance, Texas, although Ted Cruz is not as popular as he was back in 2018, the difference is marginal. I think that we are going to see a similar election result. I think Colin Allred is a strong candidate, but right now I think Texas is a lean red state. Democrats, though, to the contrary, do have their own states that are lean blue. I think Nevada is a lean blue state. I also think Arizona joins that characterization, especially now with the recent news that Kari Lake might be running for governor for Senate in the state of Arizona. That will be a huge development, which is expected to be released in October. We've already covered it, but I think it will be very beneficial for the Democratic Party in Arizona. It will really help draw the juxtaposition between Ruben Gallego as the mainstream Democrat, Kari Lake as the mainstream extreme Republican, and then maybe there will be this third party, Kyrsten Sinema, but I don't know how well she'll perform. I don't think she'll get any more than 15% of the vote. So Arizona right now, Democrats are in a good position. Nevada right now, especially on a presidential, keep in mind, 2020, perfect example. You really don't see many states differentiating from the presidential. What does history tell us about Nevada? Hasn't gone red since 2004. Every single time Republicans try to contest it, the most recent election result was Joe Lombardo's victory in the governor's race alongside Catherine Cortez Masto's victory in the Senate race. So very interesting state, but typically speaking, when it comes down to nationalized elections, House, Senate, president, Democrat, right? So that's what we're working under the assumption. And also, Republicans don't exactly have the strongest candidate. They have a failed 2022 Republican candidate who couldn't even win the nomination. So we'll see. He'll definitely make the race more competitive as we get along. I think I'm writing him off a little bit too early, but if he ends up losing by a larger margin than Joe Biden defeats Donald Trump in the state, maybe I wasn't. The final 2 states, Montana and Ohio, 2 states that I do think will come down to the wire. I think all these other states will be called on election night before we can call Ohio and Montana, though Ohio does count votes very fast. I think these are 2 states that will be very, very funny, very fascinating, not funny, maybe funny, fascinating to watch, right? For one, Montana is a very red state. In the last presidential election, Joe Biden lost that state by nearly 20 points, 16 points. Hillary Clinton lost it by nearly 20 as well, 21 points, a pretty astounding margin. You look at the Senate election results in 2020, guess who the Democrats ran? You would think by this 10-point margin, maybe they ran somebody good, but not too good, right? But Steve Bullock was an A-tier candidate, an S-tier candidate, as someone put it. He was the incumbent Democratic governor at the time, who had won his election alongside the same ballot that Donald Trump won in 2016. I kid you not. You can look at the governor election results back in 2016. Democrats won this race by 5 points or 4 points when Donald Trump was winning by 21. So it tells you something that Bullock can win this race. But the Senate race, because it was nationalized, because it mattered for the majority, Steve Daines won. It was a 10-point margin. Keep in mind, Trump won by 16, but it was a 6-point difference. A 6-point difference won't make up the margin for someone like Jon Tester. But the difference is this time around that the candidate that is expected to enter into the race over the next couple of weeks, next couple of months, is incumbent U.S. Representative Matt Rosendale. Now, if you recognize his name, it's because it's on the screen right now when we're looking at the 2018 results. And that's because he ran in 2018 and lost, and now is looking to seek a rematch against Jon Tester. Well, for somebody that voters have already rejected once, I can tell you this, they will reject them again. Not easily. Democrats will have to fight for this state, and I think it will be a very competitive one. But with this recent development that there might be an entrance of Matt Rosendale, he might enter into the race as this mainstream Republican who potentially could get the backing of some strong Republicans, though many of them have shifted over to Tim Sheehy. There's a possibility they withdraw their endorsements because maybe they didn't expect Rosendale to enter into the race. But he's the weak Republican. He's the one who could lose. And there's a very good chance that he decides to enter into the race. So Montana, with that in mind, he's been leading the primary polls without even being a candidate, I say is a tilt blue state. It's where I had it before, but I am more reaffirmed in this idea that it is going to be a tilt blue state, even with the down ballot repercussions on Democrats, benefits for Republicans. But maybe it won't be because Donald Trump is in a lot of legal trouble. And that will determine a lot for this election. So with one remaining state, you might be wondering, okay, how is Ohio going to go? Spoiler alert, I'm going to give it to the Republicans for a number of reasons. For one, Sherrod Brown, though outran the National Democrats in 2018, didn't have the most impressive election performance. I think we really overhype the 6-7 point margin of victory that he had in Ohio. Jim Renacki didn't really campaign that much. This wasn't some strong type of candidacy by the GOP. This was a lackluster one, a severely underfunded one. It was one where the polls had indicated that Sherrod Brown was going to win by 12 to 15 points based off voter sentiment. It narrowed down to being just 7. What we saw in the governor's race in 2022 reaffirmed our idea that, hey, Ohio is a red state. Went to Mike DeWine by 25 points. You look at 2018 too. Also an indicator. Though it was a blue wave year, Ohio went red, right? Ohio still stuck to its roots, still stuck to its Trump plus 20 roots. I don't have to remind you, plus 8 roots. Don't have to remind you that in 2020, voted for Donald Trump by 8 points versus 2016, 8.1. Not much of a shift because Ohio is still being pretty solidly conservative. I think this state goes red. I think even though there is that abortion referendum that's set to be good news for Democrats at the end of this year, that Ohio is still fundamentally a red state. You also find the fact that Sherrod Brown, although a Democrat, incumbency only brings you so far. And the association with Joe Biden is something that he's really going to have to shake because Biden's camp is not going to be winning this state. We will see what happens, though. That's why it's a tilt red state. I don't think it's a done deal for the GOP, but they are certainly the favorites. Depending on who the nominee, though, is, Frank LaRose is becoming weaker. He was definitely the stronger one against, Moreno, but now he's becoming weaker. So there's always a possibility that it ends up going to the Democrats in this state. But as of right now, I would say Ohio is a red state, gives the Republicans a 51-seat majority, 51 to 49. No toss-ups here. Montana stays blue. Ohio flips red. West Virginia flips red. Not much else changing on the map, but the margins are what matters too. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.